The polished marble floors of the gilded cage reflected a world Chloe Reed served but could never enter. At 23, she had perfected the art of invisibility, a crucial skill for a waitress in a place where the patrons paid to feel like gods and the staff were expected to be ghosts. Her uniform, a crisp white shirt and a tight red vest, was a costume she wore to navigate the orbits of the powerful. Tonight, like every Tuesday and Friday night, that orbit was dominated by Mr. Dae-hyun Park. He wasn't just a customer, he was a gravitational force. When he entered, conversations hushed, the air grew heavy with deference, and even the clinking of silverware seemed to quiet down. He was a man carved from cold efficiency, his face a mask of impenetrable calm, his suits so perfectly tailored they looked like armor. He always sat at the same corner booth, flanked by two sentinels who stood with the unnerving stillness of predators. Chloe knew the routine by heart. Same time, same table, same order of mineral water before his meal.
No deviación.
People like him didn't believe in chance, they believed in control. Chloe's life was the opposite. It was a chaotic scramble of rent, her grandmother's medical bills, and night classes she could barely afford. She dreamed of being a translator, of building bridges with words, a stark contrast to the walls Mr. Park built around himself. Her fascination with languages had started with her grandfather, a merchant marine who brought back stories and phrases from every port. He taught her Russian, his favorite, telling her it was the language of poets and spies. She never imagined it would be anything more than a hobby, a secret connection to a world far from this one. Tonight, the restaurant was humming with its usual controlled energy. Mr. Park was finishing his dinner. As Chloe moved to clear a nearby table, she passed the alcove leading to the restrooms where two of his guards were speaking in low, urgent tones. They thought they were invisible, too. They didn't see her. They didn't account for the quiet waitress who happened to understand every chilling word of their Russian. One guard, a thick-necked man she knew as Ivan, checked his watch. "The car is ready," he murmured. "Is everything set?" The other, Dmitri, nodded, his eyes scanning the dining room. "The nightingale sings at midnight. As soon as he is in the back seat, it is done." Chloe froze, a stack of porcelain plates suddenly feeling as heavy as concrete in her hands. It wasn't a random conversation. It was a signal, a death sentence. Mr. Park was the target, and the men paid to protect him were the assassins. She looked at the clock on the wall. 10:47 p.m. He would be leaving in less than 15 minutes. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the placid melody of the restaurant's string quartet. She was just a waitress. Invisible, but she had heard everything. And in 13 minutes, a man who didn't even know her name was going to walk into a trap unless someone did something. The decision to act wasn't a heroic swell of courage. It was a cold, nauseating certainty. To stay silent was to be an accomplice. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind, a memory from long ago. Words have weight, Chloe. What you know, you own. And what you own, you are responsible for. She owned this terrible secret now, and its weight was crushing. She set the plates down with a trembling hand, her mind racing faster than it ever had. 13 minutes. She needed to tell someone, but who? Her eyes darted to the front of the house, where the restaurant manager, Mr. Dubois, stood preening by the reservation desk. He was a man who valued appearances above all else, a gatekeeper to this world of manufactured elegance. He was the first logical step. Weaving through the maze of tables, she approached him, trying to keep her voice steady. "Mr. Dubois, I need to speak with you." "It's an emergency." He glanced at her, his lips thinning in annoyance. "What is it, Chloe? Can't you see I'm busy?" His gaze flickered over her shoulder, ensuring the clientele remained undisturbed by this breach of protocol. "It's about Mr. Park's table," she whispered, her voice tight with urgency. "His security. I heard them, they're planning something. I think he's in danger." Mr. Dubois didn't even blink. He gave a short, dismissive laugh, a puff of condescending air. "Don't be ridiculous. Mr. Park has the best security in the city. You must have misheard something. Are you feeling all right?" Perhaps the stress is getting to you. He patted her arm with a patronizing finality. Go polish some silverware. And please, do not bother our guests with your imagination. His words were a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. He hadn't just dismissed her. He had invalidated her. She was a hysterical girl, a nobody whose words had no value. The clock over the bar now read 10:51 p.m. 9 minutes left. Panic began to claw at her throat. She looked back at Mr. Park's table. He was dabbing his lips with a napkin, preparing to leave. The two guards, Ivan and Dmitri, had returned to their posts, their faces impassive stone. But now, she could see the lie in their stillness. She could see the tension coiled in their shoulders. No one else saw it. They were all blinded by the performance of loyalty. There was no time to argue with a man like Du Bois. There was only one person who mattered now. She had to get to Park himself. It was an impossible thought. It meant breaking every rule of her job, of this place, of the social order that kept her invisible and him untouchable. But the alternative was watching a man walk to his death. Her gaze fixed on Park's table, a small island in a sea of oblivious diners. He was making a quiet gesture to his head of security, a man named Minjun, whose loyalty Chloe now saw as the only unknown variable in this deadly equation. Minjun was always there, a step behind Park, his eyes constantly sweeping the room. Unlike the two betrayers, his watchfulness seemed genuine, a habit born of years of dedication. But was it enough? Could he stop two of his own men if he didn't see the threat coming? Chloe knew she couldn't count on it. The clock ticked to 10:54 p.m. 6 minutes. Her feet felt rooted to the floor, a war raging inside her between the instinct for self-preservation and the crushing weight of responsibility. Getting fired was the least of her worries. Angering a man like Park could have consequences she couldn't even fathom. But the image of him getting into that car, the finality of that action, spurred her forward. She started toward the table, her path a direct, desperate line. She made it 3 steps before a solid wall of muscle intercepted her. It was Minjun. He hadn't moved aggressively, but he was simply there. An immovable object. The Waitress station is that way, he said, his voice low and devoid of emotion, yet carrying an unmistakable command. His eyes weren't unkind, but they were absolute. No entry. Please, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I have to talk to him. It's important. It's about his safety. Minjun's expression didn't change. He had likely heard 100 variations of this line from people wanting money, attention, or favors. To him, she was just one more interruption in a long line of them. Mr. Park is not to be disturbed. Anything you have to say can be relayed through his office tomorrow. He was already turning away, dismissing her as a solved problem. There won't be a tomorrow. The words burst out of her, louder than she intended. A few nearby patrons glanced over. Minjun's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Please lower your voice. You are causing a scene. He took a step closer, subtly positioning his body to block her from Park's line of sight completely. It was like talking to a statue. He was trained to follow orders, to eliminate threats, and right now, she was the disruption, the anomaly in the otherwise perfect routine. She looked past his shoulder and saw Park placing his napkin on the table. He was getting up. The guards were moving into formation. It was happening. Time was gone. 4 minutes left, and she was standing here, blocked by a wall of protocol. Desperation tasted like copper in her mouth. She had one last insane idea. It would get her fired. It would probably get her thrown out on the street. But it might just save a man's life. The decision crystallized in a moment of pure, adrenaline-fueled clarity. If they wouldn't let her through, she would have to crash the gate. Park was on his feet now, his entourage closing in around him like a phalanx. Minjun was still focused on her, his posture radiating a quiet warning to back down. Ivan and Dmitri were flanking the exit path, their hands held loosely at their sides, ready. To Chloe, the entire scene moved in slow motion, a perfectly choreographed dance of death. She took a deep breath, muttered a silent apology to her grandmother for what was about to happen, and acted. With a sharp, deliberate movement. She twisted and shoved the dessert cart next to her. It was laden with delicate pastries, crystal glasses, and a silver tureen of chocolate sauce. It rolled 2 feet before tipping over with a spectacular crash. Glass shattered, eclairs skidded across the marble, and chocolate splattered in a Jackson Pollock-esque disaster. The entire restaurant fell silent, then erupted into a chorus of gasps. Every eye in the room, which had so carefully avoided looking at her all night, was now fixed on her. For 1 second, she was no longer invisible. She was the center of everything. The chaos was her cover. In that split second of shock, Minjun's head whipped toward the sound, his training momentarily overriding his focus on her. It was the only opening she would get. She darted around him, a blur of red and white, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Mr. Park," she yelled, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. She was running, not walking, across the hallowed ground of the gilded cage, a sin for which she knew there was no forgiveness. The guards, the betrayers, reacted first. Dmitri moved to intercept her, his face a mask of cold fury. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her bicep like steel clamps. "Get back," he hissed. But she had momentum on her side. She stumbled but didn't fall. She was only feet from Park now, who had stopped just before the main entrance. He turned, and for the first time all night, his eyes met hers. They weren't angry. They were something far more chilling. Utterly blank, as if looking at an insect that had crawled onto his pristine suit. He was assessing her, calculating. He saw a hysterical waitress, a disruption. He didn't see a savior. Mr. Dubois was rushing forward, his face purple with rage. "I am so sorry, Mr. Park. So terribly sorry. We will handle this immediately." Minjun was right behind Dmitri, ready to haul her away. It was over. She had failed. They had her. But she had one weapon left. The truth. Pinned by Dmitri, with Minjun closing in and Mr. Dubois sputtering apologies, Chloe knew she had only seconds. The world narrowed to the space between her and the man she was trying to save. Mr. Park hadn't moved. He stood like the calm eye of a hurricane, watching the chaos swirl around him with an unnerving stillness. His gaze was analytical, dissecting her, her panic, her disheveled uniform. He had already judged and dismissed her. She had to shatter that judgment. "Stop," she yelled, wrenching her arm against Dimitri's grip, the pain barely registering. "Don't get in that car." The words hung in the air, sharp and clear. Park's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps, passed through his eyes. Minjun put a firm hand on her shoulder. That's enough, but Chloe wasn't done. She locked eyes with Park, pouring every ounce of sincerity she possessed into her gaze. She ignored the guards, the manager, the staring patrons. She spoke directly to him, as if they were the only 2 people in the room. "They're going to kill you," she said, her voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. "You're men. They're going to kill you as soon as you're in the car." She took a ragged breath and delivered the final, critical piece of proof. She looked from Ivan to Dmitri, then back to Park. "The nightingale sings at midnight." She said it clearly in English, the simple phrase sounding absurd in the opulent restaurant. But it wasn't the phrase that mattered. It was the reaction. For a nanosecond, Dimitri's grip on her arm faltered. A barely perceptible slackening of muscle. Ivan, standing by the door, flinched. It was a micro-expression, a twitch of an eyelid, a slight intake of breath. It lasted less than a heartbeat. But Mr. Park saw it. He was a man who had built an empire on reading the tells of his rivals and enemies. He saw the flicker of pure, unadulterated shock on his men's faces before their professional masks slammed back into place. He saw the truth not in Chloe's desperate plea, but in their involuntary betrayal of their own betrayal. The air crackled with a new kind of tension. The blankness in Park's eyes was gone, replaced by an icy, lethal certainty. He had been looking at a nuisance. Now he was looking at a prophet. He slowly raised a hand, not to dismiss Chloe, but to silence everyone else. The room held its breath. Mr. Park's raised hand commanded absolute silence. His gaze shifted from Chloe's face to Ivan and Dmitri, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. The look he gave them was not one of anger or surprise. It was a look of profound, chilling disappointment, the kind a master craftsman gives a flawed tool just before discarding it. He spoke one word, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a death sentence. Minjun, it was all that was needed. Minjun, who had been seconds from removing Chloe, instantly understood. His body language shifted from that of a bodyguard managing a civilian to a hunter identifying his prey. He released Chloe's shoulder and, in a movement too fast to properly follow, drew a concealed firearm. Simultaneously, two other men who Chloe had assumed were patrons, men in expensive suits who had been dining quietly, stood up from their tables, their own weapons appearing in their hands as if by magic. They were Park's hidden security, his real inner circle. Ivan and Dmitri knew the game was over. Ivan made a desperate move for his own weapon, but he was too slow. Minjun was a blur of motion, disarming him with brutal efficiency. The other two loyalists converged on Dmitri, who had shoved Chloe aside in a last-ditch effort to create a diversion. He didn't get 2 steps before he was pinned against a wall, a forearm pressed against his throat. The entire takedown was executed with a terrifying, silent precision. It was over in less than 10 seconds. The patrons, who had been watching in stunned silence, now began to scream and scramble for cover under their tables. The perfect illusion of the gilded cage had been shattered, revealing the raw, violent reality that lay just beneath its surface. Mr. Dubois looked like he was about to have a heart attack, his face a pale, sweaty mask of terror. Chloe was left standing in the middle of the floor, trembling, the adrenaline beginning to recede, leaving a cold, shaky emptiness in its wake. The two betrayers were being dragged unceremoniously towards a service exit, their faces grim with the knowledge of their fate. And then, the chaos subsided as quickly as it had begun. Mr. Park walked toward her. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes, which had held the coldness of a winter sea, now held something else entirely. It was a look of intense, piercing focus. For the first time, he wasn't looking through her. He was seeing her. "You," he said, his voice still quiet, but now it held a note of something she couldn't identify. Awe? Curiosity? "Come with me." He gestured not toward the exit, but toward the restaurant's private dining room. Minjun, having handed the traitors off to his men, reappeared at his side. Mr. Park looked at the trembling manager. "Clear the room. Pay for everyone's meal. And send a bottle of your best whiskey to my private table." He then turned and walked away, expecting Chloe to follow, the entire world rearranging itself in his wake. The private dining room was a stark contrast to the opulent chaos she had just left behind. It was a sanctuary of dark wood, leather, and silence. The door closed with a heavy, definitive click, shutting out the rest of the world. It was just her, Mr. Park, and the ever-present Minjun, who stood impassively by the door. Mr. Park gestured to a chair opposite him at the large mahogany table. Chloe sat, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. He didn't sit down immediately. Instead, he walked to the window, looking down at the street below where his car, the car she had stopped him from entering, was parked. It looked so ordinary from up here, just a sleek, black sedan. A coffin on wheels. After a long moment, he turned back to her. The mask was gone. In its place was a man who looked tired and, for the first time, vulnerable. "How did you know?" he asked. His voice was raw, stripped of its earlier authority. "The language," Chloe said, her own voice barely a whisper. They were speaking Russian. "My grandfather taught me," he nodded slowly, processing this. "And the phrase, 'The nightingale sings at midnight.' What did it mean to you?" "Nothing," she admitted. "It was just specific. It sounded like a code, a signal to act. When he said it was for when you were in the back seat, I knew." He sat down, lacing his fingers together on the table. He stared at his hands as if he'd never seen them before. "I built my entire life, my entire organization, on one principle. Trust no one. People are tools. Emotions are weaknesses. Loyalty is a transaction, bought and paid for. Those men, I trusted them. As much as I am capable of trusting anyone. I paid them exceptionally well. I secured their families. In my world, that is supposed to guarantee loyalty, he looked up at her, and his eyes held a profound, shattering confusion. And then there is you, a waitress, a stranger. I have sat at your tables for a year, and I never once learned your name. I paid you nothing. I offered you nothing. You owed me nothing. Yet you risked your job, your safety, everything, to warn a man who wouldn't have noticed if you had disappeared from the face of the earth. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. Why? The question was simple, but the weight behind it was immense. He wasn't just asking about her actions. He was questioning the very foundation of his worldview. Chloe met his gaze. Because it was the right thing to do, she said softly. I couldn't just stand there and let you die. No one deserves that. Her simple, unadorned honesty seemed to strike him more forcefully than any weapon could have. He leaned back in his chair, a long, slow breath escaping his lips. It was the sound of a fortress crumbling from the inside out. The silence that followed her answer was heavy with the weight of a collapsing worldview. Mr. Park stared at her, truly seeing the chasm between his cynical, transactional philosophy and her simple, profound morality. He, the master strategist who saw every angle, had been completely blindsided by an act of selfless integrity from a person he had deemed irrelevant. He finally shook his head, a small, incredulous gesture. The right thing to do, he repeated, as if tasting a foreign phrase. In my world, the right thing is whatever ensures survival, whatever consolidates power. Your actions, they do not compute within my framework. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a thick, leather-bound checkbook and a gold pen. He wrote quickly, tore out the check, and slid it across the table. Chloe glanced down. The number written on it had so many zeros, she felt dizzy. It was more money than she or her family had ever seen. It was life-changing. It was freedom from rent, from medical bills, from the constant, grinding anxiety of poverty. This is a down payment, Mr. Park said, his voice regaining some of its familiar command, but softened with a new edge of respect. For your courage. For my life. Take it. Disappear. Start a new life where you never have to see people like me again. Chloe looked at the check, then back at him. Her heart was still pounding, but a strange calm was settling over her. She gently pushed the check back across the polished wood. No, thank you, she said. Mr. Park froze, his hand hovering over the check. No, he asked, his voice laced with disbelief. I don't understand. Everyone wants money. I don't want to be paid for not letting someone get murdered, she explained, her voice finding a new strength. I told you. I did it because it was right. Taking this, it makes it a transaction. It makes what I did feel cheap, this final act of defiance, this rejection of the very currency he used to control the world, was the last straw. He slumped back in his chair, looking utterly defeated. He had offered her the ultimate prize in his world, and she had refused it on principle. Then what do you want? He asked, his voice laced with genuine desperation. Because I owe you a debt that cannot be ignored. My honor demands it be repaid. Chloe thought for a moment, not of what she wanted, but of what this moment could mean. An opportunity far greater than money. I want to finish my degree, she said. I want to be a translator. I want my grandmother to have the best doctors. I don't want to pay off. I want a chance. Mr. Park stared at her, and for the first time that night, a slow, genuine smile touched his lips. It transformed his entire face. A chance, he mused. Yes, I can provide that. 1 week later, Chloe was packing the few belongings from her tiny apartment when a black car, sleek and unassuming, pulled up to the curb. Min-jun stepped out, not with the intimidating presence of a guard, but with the quiet respect of an emissary. He handed her a set of keys and a thick folder. Inside the folder was the deed to a new, fully furnished condominium in a safe, quiet part of the city. There were also documents confirming her grandmother's admission to the best private hospital in the state, with all costs covered indefinitely. Lastly, there was a letter of acceptance and a full 5-year scholarship to the university's prestigious linguistics program. It wasn't a payoff. It was a new life, meticulously constructed. It was the chance she had asked for. Over the following months, Chloe's world transformed. The constant hum of anxiety was replaced by the quiet focus of study. She excelled in her classes, her natural aptitude for language finally given the space to flourish. The tired, invisible waitress was replaced by a confident, articulate young woman. She still worked hard, but now it was for her own future, not just for survival. Mr. Park kept his distance at first, allowing her to settle into her new reality. But their connection hadn't been severed. Once a month, he would invite her to lunch, not at a place like the Gilded Cage, but at a simple, quiet restaurant. He didn't come with an entourage, just Min-June, who would wait discreetly at a nearby table. During these lunches, he would ask about her studies, about her grandmother's health. He listened with an intensity she had once found terrifying, but now recognized as a deep-seated respect. In turn, she found herself becoming an unlikely counsel. He would speak of his business, not in specifics, but in hypotheticals, testing ethical boundaries against her clear moral compass. He was learning a new language from her, one of character and integrity. His own transformation was less visible, but just as profound. He started a foundation, anonymously at first. Guided by Chloe's insights into the needs of her old neighborhood, he funded an after-school program for at-risk youth and a legal aid clinic for low-income families. He was using his immense resources not just to control but to build. He was repaying his debt to her not just by changing her life, but by changing the world around her, creating opportunities for countless others who were just as invisible as she had once been. He was discovering that true power wasn't in being untouchable, but in the ability to connect, to uplift, to protect. The culmination of this quiet partnership came 2 years later, on a bright, crisp autumn afternoon. Chloe stood on a small stage, not in a waitress uniform, but in a smart blazer and dress, addressing a crowd of smiling faces. They were gathered for the grand opening of the Reed Community Center, a state-of-the-art facility built in the heart of the neighborhood she grew up in. It had a library, a computer lab, a gymnasium, and classrooms for adult education. It was a beacon of hope in a place that often felt forgotten. Mr. Park stood at the back of the crowd, watching her. He looked different now. The cold, hard edges had softened. He still commanded respect, but it was no longer tinged with fear. He looked like a benefactor, a guardian. He had insisted the center be named after her, a testament to the woman who had single-handedly altered the trajectory of his life. Chloe's speech was short but heartfelt. She spoke of the power of community, of seeing one another, of listening to the quiet voices that often go unheard. As the applause faded and people began to tour the new building, Mr. Park made his way to her side. "You speak well," he said, a proud, almost paternal smile on his face. "You've found your voice. You helped me find it," she replied honestly. "You gave me the chance." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching children run laughing into the new library. The sound was a world away from the tense quiet of the Gilded Cage. "I spent my life building walls," he said, his voice reflective. "Walls of money, of power, of fear. I thought they would keep me safe. I surrounded myself with the strongest, most expensive guards I could find." He turned to look at her, his eyes filled with a clarity that still humbled her. "I never realized the biggest threat wasn't on the outside. It was already inside my fortress. And the only person who could see it was someone I had trained myself, my entire life, to ignore. An invisible waitress." He shook his head, a ghost of his old, cynical self momentarily appearing. "The irony is not lost on me." He held out his hand, not for a handshake, but as a gesture of deep, abiding respect. "Thank you, Chloe Reed. You didn't just save my life that night. You saved me from the man I was." Chloe took his hand, her grip firm and sure. The debt was more than repaid. It had been transformed into a legacy of hope, built on the simple, revolutionary idea that the smallest voice, if spoken with courage, could carry the biggest truth of all.